Julie here with Sirius, Dallas Moon, Jupiter Day, Venus Hour. Jupiter is 22 in Cancer. That's what I'm saying. So if y'all hear the word genocide, democide, depopulation, humanity extermination, that's the Jupiter 22 in with Saturn 11 degrees Aries. However, however, it's still a Venus hour, it's still a Jupiter day, we're still being benevolent. What is about to oppose Pluto? I began to basically envision the world compatible for life and taken from orgasmic birthing in the sense of pleasure. So much pleasure that the pain becomes that even the pain of labor becomes bearable. And even beyond that, like I'm not painting like, oh, a bed of roses. No, I'm just saying that that's a mindset and how this affects the life of the infant. It takes me all the way to how my own mental well-being was affected by the experience of birthing, of being born, basically, and the entire life experience that it felt that pain overwhelmed joy rather than joy gave a perspective to pain. Of course, that affects the ability to work or the ability to make a living. All the while, consciously, I'm Jupiter ruled. So if my mother would be worried and said, "Oh, at least my daughter will have a house," and she later had to sell before the subprime crisis, and it was like, "Why are you worried? I'm gonna work. I'm gonna make money. I'm gonna buy a house in cash." Like, why? Why? I did not even understand why would somebody worry about that. And then I tried to work, and I was not able to stand on my feet. And I saw, a lady, I was walking at McDonald's, the lady was ordering a Big Mac, and it says, "It smells like a corpse." And I'm like, "Darling." Until today, I don't know if we can be vegan or not, in health-wise, because so much GMO in the food. Now, I talked about the topic of housing, and another thing I began to understand this morning is that if it's something intergenerational, it does take a lot of time to adjust. There are points of intervention. Talked about the big toe as one of the symbols that something could be wrong with the fascia, something could be wrong with the thyroid, and how that pertains to life. Even when the baby is born from love and born from with parents that really wanted children. That's like, let's take a moment for it. That's scary, isn't that? If I think of how rebellious were my parents towards the dogmas in society that were love limiting, and I think about how much I still go through changing. I'm 42 years old, staying in a room with my mom. Yeah, I share the bills, but it's from like some like food stamps. And it's not that I don't have good ideas. It's that that thing has affected me so much that I would lose my will to live trying to manifest things into being. Now, and another thing I was thinking about is relationships, because one of the things that happen when a woman begins to heal herself is the support from men. And um, this is where we talk about, the family unit and the fact that it's so important to have separate houses, even in relationships, because how should I say that? First of all, there are certain things that I need to go through with me that nobody else can. And secondly, basically, even with one of us healing, is creating a secondary trauma to whoever is around. And to healing, of course, we are like secondary traumas to another. So space is needed, and it is also important for the relationship to be really around connection. It's not about not going through things together. It's about having the space, that individual space. People say, oh, that can happen within an apartment. Well, sharing our eighth house before we have even curated, I don't know if that's a smart thing. I think a lot of the marital issues, and if I listen to a divorce lawyer, I owe you in the comments the link to that. There was a guy who was working as a divorce lawyer, and he said one of the cases he had was a woman was not so able to be, sexual or whatnot. Um, the guy went what he thought was sex worker today. The way I found out that there's no such thing as sex work is trying to practice the prep for orgasmic birthing. Not because of children, but to even access the choice of whether I want to be child free or not, and for that to be a choice rather than, oh, because I couldn't afford, or because there is no way that I could psychologically maintain myself. Lo and behold, to curate trauma is practice the prep of orgasmic birthing. And then people thought I was a sex worker. Now, people thought I was a sex worker. They were trying to find solutions, because they were like, well, there was somebody who was a sex worker here, but we didn't hear any, of course, because there's no such thing as sex workers. but that is how I found out, because the torture, the pain, the dealing with all the dogmas around, and even to the point that women that were trafficked and were locked in apartments had to, when they knocked the 52 brothels down, held by a madam, they did not get food stamps. Only the women that had talked about it as prostitution, and talked about all the early childhood experiences, mentioning none of the trafficking of children, of the targeting of children, of the dog who called, only they got food stamps. Now, they couldn't say it because they need to reunite with their child. And then the people that needed to keep their child with them couldn't go to any of the authorities. Now, what's the curation from that? Of course, practicing orgasmic birthing prep. It aligns the sexuality, balances the sexuality. It's connecting with the orgasmic sense of self. And it curates people that have both aversion from sexuality or sexual addictions. By the way, also patchouli oil is a good toner and balancer. They say also tiger eye, but with the mining of tiger eye, there is toxicity, so I'm cautious about, even if ethically sourced, I'm cautious about recommending that, because I don't know about the safety of the people that work in preparing that stone. When it comes to the thyroid, the people, there are two essential oils, that is basil, and the one that works with Deneb algae is actually, yeah, wait a second. There's the oil that works with Deneb algae, but that one is also removing boundaries. And this is what we don't want. I mean, if we work it with Deneb algae and with, let's say, Artemis, or with Artemisia, then maybe that is okay. But first of all, they affect the thyroid. Secondly, it's not about removing the boundaries. Now again, blended with other oils in a Deneb algae talisman whose point is to create boundaries, that's a different story, because it removes excess for people that have hypersexuality. But again, with the hypersexuality as a result of being trafficked, then this is where I would look at the big toe. Now, I'm not a podiatrist. I'm speaking from perspective of holistic health practitioner with a training in aromatherapy. Okay, to make that clear, so that you will know what is the boundaries of what I was certified, what I actually study for certification, and what are the bits and pieces that I'm picking from. Um, and and again, before people begin to do any physical exercises, check in with whomever, check in with yourself first, and check in with whomever, and mind the Epstein infiltration still existing, even if you go to AI. I had to teach an AI, a Google AI search about the methodology when it comes to information being hidden. Now, when we talk about the separate housing, it's not so that people will go through things with themselves and only connect when they're happy and jolly. It is allowing the the fact that before we merge our 8 houses, just like we wouldn't want necessarily a bank account together with the partner, even if we have a business together. Also, when it comes to taxation in Israel, I don't know how is it now, but as per COVID, the partner that had the most wealth was written for as the householder in terms of taxes. That means if I make more money than my husband, I'm the person responsible for the taxation of both of us. That means he's dependent on me for as he's seen as a part of me as per taxation. Doesn't have his own financial sovereignty. And it also means the access to housing independent of ability to work. This is something I got from Finlanders. And they say, I know that if something happens, that at least there is a home, there is a place to be. Of course, there is freezing cold, and it's just more economic than evacuating rotting bodies from the snow, with the forming fungi and the. Okay, when we think ecosystem. Um, but this is something that is necessary because it's the basis for most humanity was not born from orgasmic birthing, even if the sex was consensual and the parents wanted children, or even if it was like a happy accident, they were happy and joyous that they had a child or whatnot. But that means that basis of existing, of being, in many cases was missing. Even podiatry, feet health. Most of the things to do with feet health are not covered by insurances, even in countries where the insurance is public. Just think about, person living from food stamps because of trauma, having to spend half the income on the correct essential oils to dissolve the fungal infection, and then of course it begins the process of detoxification. Now, fortunately, there are things like mellow, things like the naturally growing herbs that are a part of the process and are not. It does generate a different type of wealth. Uh, So it's kind of like we are supported in the process. That being said, just think about the fact that those essential oils are not funded. They're more expensive than almost any medication. And I'm a certified aromatherapist, so I can actually do the blend for myself. I'm not talking about MLM stuff. The later I can pick from the naturally growing herbs. I can detox, I don't know. And when that inner space is not fully there, of course the domestic life is difficult. So when we're talking ecosystemically, orgasmic birthing model is way more ecosystemic than cohabiting and co-housing, which breeds wars. Even the kindness, with when even kind of like even the men around, they're kind of like looking at the woman that is healing there. It's kicks in for the kind of damsel in distress type of thing. It's not an intentional thing, but it's something that happens. The natural will to help somebody that is actually find it difficult. But what actually needs to be changed is the policy for that will be able to accommodate, because otherwise it's going to instigate a situation where somebody is invested, not even thinking about this. Is the caretaker instinct, and then it creates a dependency relations that are excessive and are not necessarily because like these are people that haven't checked if they're compatible or haven't checked. It could be people or not. It's just the will to help someone, and that can create a feeling that without even thinking, a person put themselves in a situation where they gave more than they could because they invested the energy in a way that doesn't generate two separate. And it's not about the woman taking responsibility of herself, because her taking responsibility of herself is what triggered that, but about the policies aligning with both of them being able to have a separate, kind of like a separate house and a separate wealth and so on and so forth, so that the healthy boundaries are formed. This is also the things that prevent what people call third parties and cheating. Because what will happen? Let's say it's a situation of two men, and one man is taking care of himself and so on and so forth, and then another person is trying to build up the wealth to be a father. Now, because something is being liberated in their selves, that person is kind of caught in between those, was also taking care of themselves, and they're like, aligning with the care that they needed. So suddenly they're love bombed for somebody that may have even not intentionally intended to be there. But then that love bombing is not relationship, because there's still an inner child needs. And so all those things we could have understood psychologically, but we need the housing to accommodate for all of them. Where the other person who was starting to take care of themselves and grow also needed, there was a missing care at the childhood stage. and they can't meet that in the person that right now needs to tend to their to their own inner child. Or in the opposite scenario, one woman begins to grow, to take care of herself, to wonder whether this person can be a father. Can they actually maintain? And they basically plan a big launch of a big product that is almost like having a baby. And it's like, oh, this works. But then there's another person that is tending to the inner things. To love that is actually nourishing, that is actually loving, to be able to, I don't know, relax into, and so on and so forth. And then that creates this person that decided that for now they are, before they even focus on career, they focus on those inner things, where the other person was focusing on career to see before they have a baby. Now, that other person could have forgotten those inner things, or could have not had access to those inner things. And then it creates, boom, emerging a juxtaposition. Together they comprise a woman. Okay? Now, when we understand that, we understand a shit ton of things that people get so frustrated about. Both innerly and externally. It's a different thing to be overweight with pregnancy, which is not necessarily being overweight. Um, Overweight, God forbid, through because somebody was violated. Overweight with wrongfully prescribed medication, or a little bit overweight because you're tending to aligning your feet right now and you're resting and processing inner things. It's also different to lose weight because you want to be the right fit, or to lose weight because of your health, or to naturally grow and evolve and find that the excess weight naturally transforms to muscle, and what is left as the natural fertile weight. Now, the phases of understanding these things are how aligned we are with closer to orgasmic birth. As life transition, again, orgasmic birthing can be launching a product, or launching a project, or a creative project. Um, and um, and then society addresses things, if a person is coming to their Saturn maturation. It's kind of like, okay, when are you going to have babies? Wait a second, there's a breeding farm in the Epstein Island. We, that needs to be dissolved, and make place for orgasmic birthing spaces. That's also why the 401k, or the life insurance, or whatever, even occultistic practices, kind of like, there's a glass ceiling, and that glass ceiling might not even be, they can go all the way to the deep state. But for that to yield, we, if I take a look at, you know, Aries, between Aries and Taurus, Aries tells us what kind of innovators are going to be born. Now we need to prepare the ground for them. And then, people wonder, hey, what about, what about work? What about this? What about that? What a person is doing inner work so that their work actually yields. They tend to what's behind the currencies, to why were the Jews making wars? Because they were afraid of Inquisition. Why did the Inquisition even happen? Look at Genesis. That's work. It's not paid by the hour, it's paid by preventing an inquisition, preventing genocides, preventing depopulations, preventing, and in a trajectory where just like women or stay-at-home moms or stay-at-home dads, which was a trend a while ago, they were beginning to request payment for their unpaid labor. Because, yeah, raising the children, keeping the house clean, and all these things are work. And they needed to have their income in case the husband is overwhelmed by the Epstein infiltrated working sector. I mean, we can't blame him, and he walks the f out. Now here's the thing: that women work, and so these Epstein infiltrations, those that did, we went a lot faster from, hey, that person is acting narcissistic, to, wait a second, was this guy also raped? Then he's not a spy, he's a raped person by the intelligence, and then things, and then he can't talk, and then he becomes violent. Why? Because to make a living, he needed to connect with the network for job opportunities. A stay-at-home mom would find it way more difficult to understand what is going on. A woman that hasn't, for whatever reason, hasn't been in academia, even if she comes from a wealthy family, she's gonna think, well, my ideas are being plagiarized because we're not in academia, where in fact, no, it's occultistic rape that is connected to plagiarism, even in academia. And people that haven't been there would look at the many rules for plagiarism in academia, and they would think that, oh, had my retail business been an academic research, it would have been safeguarded. No, it would not. That Ivy League, um, Harvard, that works together with MIT, they have been Epstein infiltrated. I was supposed to do my third degree in MIT Harvard. The only, not for anything, the only recommendation that I had was from Dr. Rappaport that studied in MIT, and that was my gate, and they were the only faculty that taught philosophy of science by something more than logistic equations. I was 2 meters from there, and knowing that I would be dependent on a grant, what if something goes wrong? Then I would be what? Ghislaine Maxwell? And I did not even know about the Epstein infiltration. Take a look at what happens at the dorms in Harvard. At the dorms everywhere. Okay, I get that. Funded by classified project budget and so on and so forth. Um, on the other hand, people that haven't been in, let's say, the retail business might not be aware of, let's say, the Epstein infiltration of businesses that requires every business to become an informant. And basically the bribes, it basically dries out the revenue. Because the business is basically required to target its customers for trafficking. That's the meaning of being an informant. So, when we understand these things, we also understand that the practice of orgasmic birthing preparation is basically a part of orgasming, yes, but it's also part of healing trauma. And the men that are sold on all kind of weird things that don't actually transmute, the experience of birthing the new phase in their lives joyously, orgasmically, not as transmuting pain to power. There's so many things. Think about everything that women have been through has been experimented on men in secret societies and in the military complex. Same for BIPOC people. While the attempts to keep the division between the genders, although some of the most healing processes, the most beautiful healing processes I've seen is, war veterans speaking with women that escaped, let's say, domestic violence, talking about misplaced arousal, the shame that was associated with that, and the fact that this is not relaxed arousal. It is not secure attachment. We can relate on the basis of orgasmic birthing rather than on the basis of relation through trauma. And again, I'm not saying not to relate with trauma and so on and so forth. It's like, of course, understanding that there are things in the traumas that people have been through basically creates a certain cohesion. Where we don't have to stay in perpetual trauma to relate. Now, once many people see what can be transmuted and how sexual energy can be aligned and how erotic, non-erotic self-honoring creates secure attachment, we even tend into the scriptures, to religion, then people will have way more faith in the world and in life. This opens the door to the ritual abuse survivors transforming and able to participate in more orgasmic birthing process of life changes. Then they will understand that let's say, I'm sorry, I have mimosa orb around one of my planets, and I think it conjuncts my Mercury and conjuncts a place. So yeah, but that let's say house in Côte d'Azur that was offered and so on, so at age 10, 9, 11, it wasn't for nothing there. It was in the energy, the life energy of the infant, because it's a part of the life. You know, there is in astrocartography, we have places. Um, Shout out to Helen, and now she's getting to the visibility issue. Really love her work. I'm gonna be approaching my Pluto square sun in the coming decade, so I already see Pluto is 5 degrees, my sun is 15 degrees Taurus, but I already see the trajectory of how the teachings around visibility begins to come up, because sun is visibility and Pluto is the deep dredged issues. People can look at people being trafficked, but orgasmic birthing, willingly consensual broadcasts for mothers to watch, let's say, a birthing process, are still overwhelming. When we talk about visibility and the wounds around visibility, and of course the fact that not every birthing mother wants a camera there, and it just makes sense, but every tenant had no choice whether they have a camera or not, or whether they're seen through a satellite or not. And that was not used to call for help, but to traffic them. When I was working, for example, I'll give the example of mimosa. So one of the things I saw is definitely the story of Lucas, but being offered to live there and so on and so forth. The slow living channel, and then I see there are mimosa trees there, and then there was only the perfume of John Malone, but John Malone, I was waiting to see if he was on Epstein list, and he was, and I haven't seen any step towards reparations. Then I found a simple mimosa hand cream. There was actually in a 50% discount, and I had enough money to buy it because it was 50% discount. So I'm just studying that and how that simple herb and the processes I went through with understanding where was the hidden energy and how it's to do with real estate. I did not connect this to the delay around this curve, the transformation around this curve. Now, basically, the Mimosa asteroid would be opposing my Pluto. And I learned that teaching from Orphic astrology, and then Orphic astrology was doing something that looked like a ritual abuse towards, um, supposedly in favor of Palestine, but something there felt still on the levels of ritual sacrifice. It's kind of like it was kind of like addressing beta per se with the right rage, but I'm not sure it was targeting the right people. And even then, like it's just something around that ritual was not really. Um, and that was the person that taught the teachings of the herbs, where basically with mimosa I would learn about ritual abuse and connect that I would learn that it's connected to the real estate, and this is actually, um, and again, I'm afraid to name, not because I don't want to give credit, but because the people that publicly speak constantly, they're the people that I don't know if it will harm them or not. Um, that they talked about that being basically a form of plagiarism. I noticed the connection at the Me Too, the connection between sexual boundary violation and plagiarism, but I didn't see it's an occultistic issue. I mean, I saw there's something, I did not know the word occultistic, so I saw something like that, but I did not know to connect that. And because those are rituals where people get into psychosis, so people might not connect between one or the other, which is why I said that the retrieved sense of self and abolishing rape is essential also to know what the origin of ideas. For example, when I talked about honoring the feminine, both me and Emma from Emspiracy had the concept of honoring the feminine. Both of us talked about it in completely different ways. Both of us connected that to maintenance of the lineages, two different people, two different ways to address that topic, which is obvious and direct for me. And then there was that issue of, wait a second, Lakshmi is lovely, orgasmic birthing. Yes, it's loud, okay, the vocal cords, that's the entire point that, we talk about cervical orgasm is total and complete loss of now for some people the trauma may have been, how should I say that? For some people it's about being loud and that being accepted, screams of pleasure instead of just screams of pain, and that being accepted. For some people, it may be going within. It may be that the silence being a good silence rather than a bad silence. So I don't want to. And that pertains to protecting our ideas as well. And this is also when I think about the direct from me, is also where we can protect our ideas without assuming that somebody plagiarized them. And the more we practice the organic birthing aligned practices, the closer we are to that discernment. There's an ongoing theme of women aligning with honoring the feminine and the effect on the lineages right now. Not just women. Each lineage, each person has their own alignment because it's their own sense of self. Even when we talk about products, I remember when it came to astrological talismans, I'm a night chart, and I felt how I was trying to, let's say, purchase, and then there would be something off, something weird, something not aligning. And then I'm like, okay, I'm a night chart, perhaps I should pay attention to that. I'm like, okay, I'm misrepresented, and then I'm like, I'm looking at the elections like, oh, they already have Saturn in a bad place for me. They already have this. They already have that. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to do the elections for me. I'm going to have to do the talismans for me. And I'm like, oh, there's a misrepresentation of the night chart because most were day charts. Then I began to work with the unification of the sects. And then there was the concept that was, you know, basically like, hey, people made talismans of this, of that, and we're still targeted and so on and so forth. What was missing was the orgasmic birthing thing, and the fact that addressing that the Epsteiners was a breeding farm endeavor. So Mimosa opposite Pluto. There's just one herb. Only now I'm connecting all the dots around this. Um, with the orchids, I still have to untangle this. I did a Venus talisman, Venus in Pisces with the orchids. So, but the orchids, well, I don't know. Coming from also the matrilineage, the context of buying flowers, and I'm like, well, the orchids, they absolutely look like a vagina with a clitoris. There are some flowers that people that can how does that process just flowers, not orchids. is obviously is obviously looking like something. One definitely needs to have their own place growing them, let's just say. And they require care. So if Mimosa was next to my Mercury ruling the fourth house, and I got the Kotazor and both the real estate issue and the ritual abuse that was basically plagiarizing the real estate from people, then the orchid is like, well, that's obviously that type of a flower. It's not like a gift to your mom. And these plants are celebrated. There's all the types of orchids, um, and they have like big celebration where they bring all these types and have these um, shows. There's something very yeah, there's just something about that that I still I don't know. I have to. I think it's either next to my moon or to my Venus. I don't know where it was. Um, so it has to do with care. For example, if you're growing orchids, you can't just, you can't just leave your house. You have to. So it's like somebody has to care for the orchid. You can leave your house for 2 weeks when you're growing tomatoes, but not. And I mean, most of the trees, they're like they're trees. It's not something. Um, so these are kind of the thoughts that arise at this moment. And a reminder of the importance of the sense of self. Now, when we begin to actually align, this is another thing that happens, and this is where, first of all, the stories. If let's say the issue of the voice came out, and suddenly a story of orgasmic birthing by a woman that, particularly the snapshot was around her being vocal, or maybe even the right communities. Um, and um, and this also brings the emotional the emotional aspects. Also aware of, and here's the thing, is not just aware of what is missing, because that might not be missing suddenly. Aware of something is not missing. And then make sure that, or aligning, the thoughts around these things, or the deep-rooted fears find actual solution. There's something that's like, oh, there's an action we can actually take to align our nervous system, and process through those fears to something that is actually joyous, is actually joyous living. But also the actual healthy boundaries or proper boundaries begin to form naturally. Um, Holocaust jokes later. um, and now remember the time when I looked at political assassination, I looked at assassination of journalists. Then I wanted to see more study cases. And then it was a study live with me on Spirit of Matter, and I look at it and I see Israel is the top assassin of journalists. Uh, that moment, together with the looking at the Islamic Golden Age and the study of astrology and how it originated from studying the stars to predict their patterns for rituals. What rituals? Today we'd call it Epsteiners. Talk about sorting the wheat from the chaff. Um, okay, that's my entire life practice. The island. The island. Now, when we begin to align the energy, also things begin to, how should I say that? Also, the internal boundaries to the type of even humor or type of sexual humor we are okay with and not okay with begins to align. It's kind of like, does that humor actually support orgasmic, like orgasmic birthing orgasm? And if it's not, we also begin to focus and concentrate on the environments that do support from that point of view. Also within ourselves, in times where we have, if I think about the satire I wrote during the Me Too, and had I been more aligned, probably would be different. It definitely was taking the culture and joking about the culture, but was it actually that level of alignment? No, not at all. It was a decade and something ago. Um, and it also pertains to the type of rebellion, the discernment between, hey, does this rebellion or revolution serve and support orgasmic birthing as life transitions, or is it just diluted? We become more sensitive to whether that alignment is in the people around us or not. And it begins to bother us more. It begins to be a little more frictional so we can actually maintain לא ידעתי אם זה בכוונה או לא, ואז אמרתי, רגע, זה לא בכוונה. כי אני נמנעת מלהעיר אם זה משהו ש... מכירה את זה. Um, and it goes through both, how should I say, things are more triggering or things that we didn't mind in the past suddenly are an issue. And when our responses become more responsive and less reactive, again, the more aligned we are. But it's also about radically accepting when we are just being reactive.